Hey everybody, welcome back to the Shaky Camera. I wanted to talk about urban operations. I revisited this game, played it yesterday with my friend, and I wanted to just share my thoughts. Maybe I don't see a lot of love for this game, so I'm hoping that maybe this will spark a little interest, maybe spark a little conversation on it, and maybe this will be something I see more of out there in the world. Now, it is a game that is built, and I'll tell you why I think this. This is not a gameplay, this is just all talking about the game. I think this is built for a very specific audience. I'll start with that. Built for a very specific audience. So the designer was an officer in the French army. If I have the story right, it's in that there's a little paragraph talks about the designer, and so I'm hoping French army, worked at like the War College, trained at a urban ops training center, and built a game. And the focus of the game is teaching maybe urban operations clearly, but from the standpoint of the importance of force on force avoidance damage, kind of a thing. So let me explain. You might say, Eddie, that's not the focus. Well, it kind of sort of is. So let's open up the box, see what's in here. Now, what really intrigued me from the beginning, I got this game a few years ago. Nuts Publishing sent it to me, and I played it. I did a sample gameplay video, did the usual overview, kind of unboxing stuff, and it's fine. I have all the pieces and components just kind of shoved in here so it doesn't look pretty. Here's the rule book. The rule book is adequate. I'll say it's adequate. When the game first came out, I remember reading forum posts about how some of the things in here, it was hard to follow a little bit. And folks said, well, maybe it's because it's a French translation and, it's the first rules draft. But there are folks on Board Game Geek that are very eager to answer questions and give clarification to things. So learning the game, for a person who invests the time, is not going to be much more complicated than any other war game. Now, this one does bring some concepts. This is the concept that really spoke to me. First, so maybe a couple concepts. The first was, this is a multi-conflict box. This is a sandbox game, if you will. You could create scenarios for just about any era of combat. The box includes kind of some Cold War to some Fallujah. There's about 50 years of gaming in there, but if a person was clever and took the time, you could create, like I thought what would be cool would be a Stalingrad type of game based around this system. Because I think that the system is that flexible. Just had to create the cards and you'd be all set. The other thing that I also found super interesting is this concept of weapons effect. The idea being that when you are firing, say, down a row of hexes, and it's not a new concept. Think of like Advanced Squad Leader. You're creating a lane of fire. And like with Advanced Squad Leader, you would put in, like if you had 20 firepower, you'd put in little markers of 10 firepower, that lingering bullets in the area. And if anybody kind of passes across that lane of fire, there's some residual damage there. And they have that modeled here with like light weapons. So machine guns, your rifles and things, they can potentially be spraying down bullets, not only down the initial few hexes towards the target, but beyond a little bit too. So one of my complaints with war games a lot of times is, sure, let's say in hexes my weapon can shoot 5 hexes, and sometimes they just simply say, well, if there's somebody between you and the target, you can't shoot because they'd be in the way of the bullets. Here they're saying, yeah, go ahead, shoot, because anything in that lane has a potential of being hit. And then, just because you're aiming at a target in this hex, there is a chance that some of your bullets keep going, because bullets don't magically stop. That to me made a lot of sense. And another thing that I thought was cool in the modeling, if you will, is like the idea of like when tanks shoot, and they have a picture here. I tried to explain this to my son because we were playing an unrelated game with my son, and he was like, well, gee, why can't a tank shoot over the head of like this somewhat smaller vehicle? They have a picture. Yeah, here. This is a tank firing as an example, right? There's this huge amount of blast that this thing generates. I can only imagine if you were infantry right under that. Like, that's the reason why, like, on big battleships and stuff, they don't have crew running around on deck when the main guns fire, because there's a lot of overpressure and blast and heat and all kinds of stuff happening. And then you figure that's, on the immediate area surrounding the tank. And then there's also explosion effects for when that shell hits something. Maybe like a high explosive shell, maybe depending on the type of shell. This doesn't really model the difference between HE and AP all that much. It's just you shoot the main gun, here's where it affects. So they have modeled in here, it's not a complicated system, but they take some of those concepts into effect. Because when you're dealing with urban environments, like when I was in Somalia, it was very claustrophobic going down some of the streets. They're not as, like, buildings are there. They're not these huge high skyscrapers, but it's tough to fight in a narrow environment like that, where this also takes into the account of effect that yes, if there's buildings might block some of that shock wave, but the pressure going in between the buildings, those things are modeled here. And so when I was playing with my friend, he was like, yeah, this is tough because I got to drive a tank down the street, but it doesn't take advantage of some of the tank's shooting abilities and things because there's buildings and stuff all in the way. And as we got talking about, I was like, well, yeah, that all makes sense. That's what this game is speaking to, is how do you deploy and implement your soldiers, troops, and equipment, keeping in mind the idea of like the what they call area of effect, their weapons effect, right? So your lanes of fire, the overpressure of shooting, how do you make all of that click to effectively maneuver your troops, engage in combat, and keep your people safe? That's where this game goes, and I think it does very good on that. Now, I'll show you some things. Now, there is high praise there. However, when playing it, sometimes making it all click is a little troublesome for me and my buddy. We spent a lot of time going over like these charts and reading the book. So we would read the book, and here's a problem that we would come up with. So combat, for example. The concepts are very simple, and combat can actually be pretty deadly, which makes sense for a modern situation. Those weapons are designed to kill, and they do. They really do. So if I'm shooting, say this block, I got blocks here. We'll just say, if I'm shooting from here to here, what I like is built into that combat resolution is the person being shot can either try to withdraw and avoid combat or stay and fight. But first problem with that, when that block decides to withdraw, it has to roll a die, and there's a chance it could take some damage. And that kind of sucks, because the damage you could take withdrawing would probably be less than the damage you would take if you stood and fight. So sometimes it's almost like, I'll just stay and return fire. The only time I might want to withdraw is if you have something called inadequate firepower, if you will, inadequate armament. So if a tank is shooting, let's say this was a tank shooting at some infantry here, these guys would have inadequate to return fire. So they would withdraw, but they automatically, they can withdraw, or like they can stay and fight, but they take well, they can't really fight, but they would lose 2 operational strength levels. And a unit starts with 3 operational strength levels. So just think of it like hit points. So I can have that infantry stay in place because maybe they're about to do something and they lose 2 operational strength levels simply because they have rifles. But they're hiding, they're taking cover from the tank. So there's some harsh penalties built into things that would make sense. Like, well, yeah, I'd withdraw, but then I got to roll a die, and I could still lose up to 2 operational strength levels on a poor roll, or just 1, or nothing on a really high roll. So there's some real harshness there, which again, somebody might say, but Eddie, modern battlefield, okay, modern battlefield, but in terms of a gameplay, it doesn't make your decisions feel like smart decisions when it would be easier just to stay and take the damage and continue doing what you're doing. But let's say the 2 forces decide to fight. You each roll the die 10. Great. Your units, like if I've got a card, maybe we'll zoom in a little bit here. You have a card. Again, this goes to the cleverness of the system. So you're going to have a card if you have infantry. So I've got these folks here, Katanga, I guess is some sort of African scenarios. And this infantry card could represent the infantry soldiers themselves with AK-47s or a platoon leader or platoon support. And then it has range bands and firepower into those range bands and a little indicator saying that, that lane of fire, bullets go beyond a little bit. And fine. So you have your firepower value, you roll a die 10, and both of you roll a die 10 simultaneously, and you compare it against this chart. If you roll a 7 to 9, you get to go look at the critical hit. And this usually infers some kind of bonus to this combat that's about to take place. Unless you roll something that says that you automatically destroy the opponent's block. If you both roll criticals and destroy each other, that's some very lucky shooting. But that would, end combat if I destroy the enemy. So you don't even have a chance to come down here and check combat results. But if you both roll the 0 to 6 range, you come down here, there's some modifiers to your firepower strength, and eventually just whoever has the highest firepower is declared the winner. And easy. And if you lose the combat, you lose 1 organizational strength level, which means you rotate a block. I'll grab a block now. And if you can see here, the blocks have like 3 pips, 2 pips, and 1 pip. Easy. Standard block stuff right there. So I'm just going to, rotate because I lost 1, and now I've only got 2 left. Easy peasy. If you were doing an assault, then the loser would lose 2 operational strength levels. So if I was at 3, I'd rotate, so I'd have 1 remaining, and I would withdraw from the area. And my opponent would move in to occupy. On the outside, that sounds pretty good. But what's interesting is, if I tell you though, just when playing, it doesn't seem to move that easy. It's hard to explain, but there are times where things seem really, really lopsided. For example, I had a case of a armored personnel carrier. We were doing the like Christmas and Chechen event scenario. So there was a Russian APC, and then I had a green infantry unit. I'll just pretend this is green. They were a few hexes away, and the RPG, I was within the closest range I could use, because the RPG actually has a few hexes where it can't shoot because the weapon doesn't arm, my understanding. So the warhead doesn't arm. But we fought at each other. So this guy fired with his RPG. This guy decided to stay and fight. He didn't want to withdraw. And the APC player rolled like a 3. He didn't roll very high, but I rolled a 9 with the RPG. So when you look here, I rolled a 9, so I look over here. It says, versus a square block, which an APC is a lightly armored vehicle. It says with a block with a weapon special characteristic, which I had RPG, which was a black square. I rolled a 9. It says destruction. The opposing block loses the fight. So once you have that destruction or opponent loses the fight, then the rest of the combat pretty much doesn't take place because the other person lost and nothing happens to you. So so I guess that means my infantry guy got the drop on the tank or the APC couldn't rotate its 23 whatever millimeter cannon it's got to return fire. I just shot it with an RPG and blew it up. That makes sense. It's just that when playing it, it felt like, I don't know, it's really hard to describe. The combat just wasn't it's just hard to explain. I wish I could put my finger on it. There's just something on it where it felt like we still ended up with questions, because my opponent felt like, well, gee, I didn't get to shoot back at all. There's no potential that I did score some hit. Nope, I just simply blew you up. You lost your die roll. So even though your APC has a higher firepower value and whatnot, I got the drop on it, blew it up. So sorry for you. Maybe that's exactly how it's meant to play it. Just as we played longer and longer, these lopsided, one-sided events played in more and more, and it really didn't feel like a very interactive or dynamic combat. Then, just to top that off, that whole concept with the fire lanes and those weapon effects, that only affects friendly forces. Yes, that's the one thing that if we were going to change an item in the game, we would change that. And my buddy was like, that doesn't even make sense. And I was like, well, it's kind of how the rules are written. In fact, there's a designer note in here that talks about that, weapon effects. A leader's main concern in operation is to avoid friendly fire and collateral damage, but in cities with very diverse armaments, ballistic blast effects, overpressure ricochets, various sprays, or echoes in underground causes significant risks. The weapon effect rules represent them. Great. It is true that bolts and explosions affect everyone the same way, but to drive the lesson home, any damage to friendly forces and civilian population is more severely punished than that inflicted upon the opponents. So yeah, it's like, I get it. There are these effects, and that was the thing that just kind of killed the interest for my buddy. It was like, wow, those effects should be equally applied. But then that's where I had that epiphany. Aha! Because this game is designed around a specific thing. The deadliness of urban operations and the importance of managing your forces to avoid that, which would make sense as, say, a French officer teaching people about urban operations and the importance of coordinating your soldiers and movements on the ground to avoid friendly fire and civilian casualties. Does it make for a great translation into a board game? It does, if you just simply take out the fact that and just play with those weapon effects affect everybody equally. So like I said, like with a couple changes, I would find this much, much more enjoyable versus the rules as they're written. So still, this is in my wheelhouse because it has a Somalia campaign. I was in Somalia. I'm not always a big fan of gaming things in Somalia, but this has, like, if I was going to do some kind of urban operations game in Somalia, like this would be it. Okay, but not all doom and gloom, so let's just put this back up. After I got done playing with my buddy, I went to the Board Game Geek just to kind of see how other people were feeling about the system on a whole, and come to find out that there is a version 2 in the works. That's fantastic. So reading some of the comments, it feels like I'm not the only one that maybe has not kind of fully grasped exactly what I'm supposed to do with the game to make it feel like I know what I'm doing with the game. And I'm told, well, not that I was told, but from reading, it seems like version 2 is going to really help with the rules, straightening things out, a lot, several years worth of clarifications and things that they can put into a newly translated rule set. There will be updated components you can get, so you can either buy Urban Operations version 2 when it comes out, and I don't know when that will be. It sounds like they've been working on it for a couple of years, and that it's pretty much ready. Or there will be an upgrade kit you can purchase if you're like myself, a version 1 owner, and that is something I'm looking forward to, because I don't want to shelve this game completely. I think that maybe with the upgrade that's coming out, I think that I can revisit this and maybe get a better feel for what it is I'm supposed to be doing. Again, it's really been difficult for me to put into words why it doesn't click with me. And if you've never played the game before, it's kind of hard to explain the feeling. It's a feeling. Mechanics wise, the game, I'm sure, is sound, but as maybe because I've had exposure to a lot of other game systems that do fights in cities, and it seems a lot more simple. I don't know. Just something has never quite clicked with this one. But I want it to, because I really like the concept, and I can see how this could expand, again, going back to other wars. Like, I think a World War II Stalingrad mod for this would be really, really cool. So I'm hoping the version 2 kit will kind of rekindle that interest and bring me back to it to devote more time to it. So anyway, I wish I could better explain what I'm feeling for the game, but if you've got any experience or thoughts, please feel free to share, because again, it could just be simply that I'm not playing it right. I don't know if even that makes sense. Maybe my expectations of what I want are not what this was trying to model. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you will share your thoughts on this game and others, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks a lot.